Good morning to the O'Brien family and to the church that meets in their home. My name is Nick Rendelman. I'm very excited to be able to share a few thoughts with you this morning as you go through the book of James. And let me begin by just talking about how I came to Christ. When I was 16, I was a typical high school student doing a lot of partying, chasing girls, and living for myself, drinking a lot. And God met me one night in a movie theater, actually. I saw a movie called What Dreams May Come, and it really affected me profoundly and convicted me that heaven and hell were both real places and that I had to make a decision where I was going to go. And one night, a week or so later after seeing the movie, I was going to sleep and I felt God clearly speak to me and say, "My son, Jesus Christ, has died for your sin. He's risen from the dead. And if you will receive him, you can be forgiven and secure your place in heaven." And it was in that moment and that night that I gave myself to the Lord. And after that, everything changed. I remember going through the hallways of my high school the next day and just completely looking at people differently and seeing them through the eyes of God, as it were, wanting to love them, wanting to share the message of Christ with them, and wanting to share how Jesus had touched my life. The second thing I want to share with you today, Garrick has asked me to talk about different trials I've faced, and I have faced a couple of really challenging circumstances in the last 5 years. When I was a student at Moody, after I graduated, I went to the mission field and served God in Austria for a summer. When I got back from the mission field, through a bizarre set of circumstances, I found myself facing charges for a felony for battery to a police officer. I don't really have time to go into that. You should know that I'm not an aggressive person and I never attacked a cop. The charges were falsified, but for about a year of my life, I had to fight these charges in the court, and if I was convicted, I could have faced time in jail. Well, my Christian faith never left me in that time, and I prayed continually to God, and I fasted, and God gave me a promise early on in the trial that he was going to deliver me from the book of Jonah, where it talks about, although many people are against you, I'm going to tear off your shackles. And I read that in the context of a Sunday morning church service and felt strongly that God was going to deliver me. And sure enough, about a year after the charges were placed, I was completely cleared of the Chicago court system. I didn't go to jail, and it was an awesome testimony. The second example of a difficult circumstance or trial I've been through in the last 5 years happened 3.5 years ago when my younger brother was killed in a car accident. At the time, I was working in a restaurant as a server, and my neighbor came by the restaurant and said, "Get in the car, we have to go immediately." And she was crying, and she just looked absolutely beside herself. And I knew right away it was an immediate family member. So I said, "Is it my father?" She said, "No." "Is it my mother?" She said, "No." I said, "Is it Ryan?" And she was silent. I said, "Is it Ryan? Did Ryan pass?" And it was in that moment that I literally stopped dead in my tracks, sat down on a curb and said, "Hold on, Nancy." And I was flooded with the joy of knowing my brother was with Jesus Christ. Because you see, in the last 7 years or so, I had been praying and fasting for my brother to be saved. And he had had a salvation experience, but then subsequently fell away from the Lord and only returned to God in the last 2 years of his life. And it was a huge answer to prayer. And when my brother passed, God is my witness, after the shock of what is going on here kind of just rushed over my emotions, the second thought I had was, "Praise you, God. My brother is with you right now. And it's all because of prayer and fasting and being faithful and seeking you for his soul." I kind of talked a little bit about my reactions and responses to the trial, but I will say this. When I was arrested, that was a scary time. When I was down in the police office, I remember getting harassed by the officers, and I had to spend a night in jail. And the next day, I literally did not know where I was going to be sleeping that night because my bail was set at something like $15,000, which you pay a tenth of that, which would be $1,500. And just getting back from the mission field, I didn't have that money to my name. And so if no one bailed me out, I was going to Cook County Penitentiary, which is a terrible prison and renowned as being one of the worst. My response at that point in time was I fasted. As soon as I had the rest, I didn't drink any water. I didn't take any food. I remember the guards trying to give me food, and I just denied it, and they thought I was crazy. And they said, well, just take it for later. And then another guy said, hey, can I have that? I said, sure. And I just gave him my sandwich. And, that was something that I had been practicing doing for years before it happened, never anticipating that I would be fasting to be freed from jail. But I knew that when you're desperate, fasting is one way to really get a hold of God. When my brother passed, that wasn't scary. It was emotionally, emotionally, I can't even really find the right word, just painful, but almost borderline, just it just wrecks you. I don't know how else to say it. It wrecks you. It makes you feel like you've just lost a limb. You feel emotionally scarred to the depth of your soul. My brother was only 22. It was totally unexpected, the accident. So with that kind of pain, because I had been praying for my brother's salvation for so long, I mentioned the initial joy I felt, but subsequently there was a lot of sorrow. There was a lot of missing him. There was a lot of dialogue with God saying, Lord, why did you take my brother? Why, when he was had such a promising career ahead of him, when he was just ready to graduate college, when he had just given his life back to the Lord and he was really doing your kingdom work, why did you take him? And I really believe that how I got through that trial was through, first and foremost, believing that my brother was with Jesus Christ, and that being the result of his faith that he had professed 2 years earlier. Also, faith in believing that God is completely sovereign and in control of everything. And that helped me to see my brother's death in light of God's sovereign plan, knowing that there was a specific reason why God chose to take my brother, that it wasn't a mere accident. And by believing in that sense of destiny, I really felt released in my spirit that my brother was fulfilling the plan that God had for his life, even if it meant through death. And Paul talks about that in Philippians. He said, whether I live or whether I die, Christ will be glorified. And then the fourth thing here that Missy and Garrick asked me to share about was how I got to the point in my walk with God to have that kind of faith, and how would I encourage all of you to build that kind of faith. And I spoke with Garrick about a week ago about this too. One thing you can never prepare for is tragedy. And in one sense, I would have never been able to prepare for losing my brother. Before it happened, there's no way you can possibly think to yourself, okay, what would that be like? Let me, it's different. Like if you're preparing to, if you're a musician like myself, you're going to a recital. You can kind of mentally prepare for that. You kind of know what it takes. You've done it before. But when you're talking about something like a catastrophe of losing a loved one, or going through an extreme situation with your health, or something like that, you simply can't really prepare for that emotionally. But what you can do is walk very closely with Jesus Christ and build your relationship with him, because he says in Matthew, therefore everyone who listens to my words and builds his life accordingly will be like the house built on a rock, and when the storm comes, it doesn't collapse. But he who hears my words and doesn't act accordingly will be like a house built on the sand, and when the storm came and the winds hit it, it was destroyed. And so I really believe that the key to going through the storms of life is a concrete faith that's built upon your relationship with Jesus Christ. And if you're strong in your relationship with him, he will sustain you. He will give you the comfort. He will give you the wisdom to go through some of those more trying times of life. And the other thing I would say, and I'll just wrap it up with this, I believe that there are a lot of different theologies there about God, and I know in this day and age there's stuff ranging from open theism to God being completely in control of everything, and I definitely swing the pendulum on the side of God's sovereignty, because I see it in Scripture, where even it says in the book of Acts, Peter's talking about the gospel, and he says, you men crucified Jesus by nailing him to a cross, but God predestined this before the foundation of the world, and he rose him from the dead. And so you can see how the free will of man and the sovereignty of God collides into this mysterious entity. But that is what I believe is a key element in going through difficult trials in life. And if you have that, and if you're strong in your relationship with God, he's going to see you through. And the result of those trials is a purified, sincere faith that has a great reward. So I would encourage you, just like the writer of Hebrews said, don't throw away your confidence. It's going to be richly rewarded. And you've got need for perseverance as you go through this life and face different sufferings. But there is a King of Kings waiting for you at the finish line with the crown of life, and it will be well worth running the race well. Thank you very much. I'm Nick Rendelman. Good to be with you this morning. God bless.